The modern reputation of the Hutts may be as opportunistic crime lords ruling over a series of cartels, but the Hutts have, over the course of their history, repeatedly demonstrated a military prowess and brutality which more than rivals even the Sith empires. The history of the Star Wars galaxy is littered with dead planets, but very few empires or warlords can claim to have wiped out entire sectors, leaving them not just uninhabitable, but missing in action for millennia. And to get to the bottom of one of the most mysterious, a sector known as the Ash Worlds in the Outer Rim, we need to go back over 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Hutts dominate the Outer Rim with few other factions able to challenge them in modern periods of galactic history, but in this early period where galactic exploration was still limited and before the Hutts had decided to focus on soft economic power rather than military power, two factions had proven themselves to be the regional powerhouses in their neighborhood. These were the Hutts themselves and the Tionese, though they hadn't met yet. The Tionese had risen to power fairly recently, around 25,150 BBY, under the leadership of the pirate king of Argai, Xur, who conquered several local systems and installed himself as the ruler of the Kingdom of Kron. I'd like to do a dedicated video on the growth and history of Tion, as well as a deeper dive on some of the wars we'll be talking about, but in order to not get too far from the topic of the Ash Worlds, we're going to stick to just an overview here. Xur's conquests were followed up by his son Xim, who took the Tionese throne 20 years after his father's conquest began. Xim, known as Xim the Despot, pushed these conquests further than his father had ever dreamed, expanding into the Thanium worlds to the west and then the Kyrium reaches to the east, creating new provinces within his empire and taking key worlds within them as important new throne worlds. While 6 of Xim's 8 throne worlds remained widely known and present throughout galactic history, the location of 2 were unclear. The 7th and 8th throne worlds, Hieronymi and Astigone, did not have their locations recorded in any local histories. In fact, the region they were part of, the Kyrium Reaches, were known only from old documents. There were plenty of theories on where the Reaches were and which planets could be Astigone or Hieronymi, leading to many planets' local tourism boards near Tionese space trying to claim the honor of having been them in the distant past, like some sort of stupid History Channel documentary on Atlantis, but nobody knew for sure where it was, or why it seemed like the galaxy had just forgotten where 2 rich worlds and an entire galactic region had gone. What the galaxy did have was a mysteriously barren sector known to the Republican Empire as the Ash Worlds next to Tion, believed by some to simply be the result of a particularly destructive supernova. Little did people know that these 2 mysteries were actually related, and that the cause of the Ash World's desolation was somewhat further south and far more violent. The Kyrium Reaches, named for an alloy used to armor Tionese ships, had more than just new resources for Xim's fleet. Their exploration and conquest led to contact between the Tionese and local traders working for the Hutts. Each faction was used to being the dominating power within their sphere of influence. While war didn't break out immediately, the Hutts were nice enough to offer the Tionese the chance to be favored slaves, which Xim and the Tionese did not appreciate. Xim began a campaign conquering outlying Hutt worlds down a path known as the Warrior's Trace. While the Tionese managed to win these early stages, the Hutt counterattack was equally brutal under Cossack the Hutt's leadership, turning the war around with the Battle of Vontor, eliminating Xim, and not just pushing back Tionese military presence in the Trace, leaving only colonies and hyperspace beacons behind, but also entirely wiping out the planet Morillon, whose inhabitants had rebelled against the Hutts in cooperation with Tion. While all of this was known to galactic history, including the tendency for Hutts to entirely wipe out planets as they had at Morillon, historical records didn't involve the Hutts going further into Tionese space at this point. The mystery of the Kyrium Reaches location still remained until just 3 decades before the Battle of Yavin, when Corellian historian Blaise Harand made the connection between the Ash Worlds, a Tionese holiday, and the lost Kyrium Reaches. The Tionese holiday in question involves a lot of Xim symbols and is basically Halloween in some places, including the planet Barsag in the Tionese cluster, where it's called Wake Meat, complete with costumes and candy. But on the planet Stalimur, it involves a lot more repenting and atonement, and it's known as the Devouring instead. Harand thought that these holidays must be a cultural remnant of some devastating event, where other scholars had rejected the natural explanation of a supernova for the Ash Worlds and gotten closer to the real story by thinking maybe they were an unconnected set of Hutt holdings which had been used up long before, Haran argued that they were in fact the remains of the long-lost Kyrium Reaches, and their current state was the result of a genocidal campaign by the Hutts against the Tionese. Haran sent several of his students to the heavily irradiated Ash Worlds, which for one thing confirmed the radiation was consistent with fission attacks 25,000 years prior, and for another seems incredibly irresponsible to do. The Empire soon took power though, and cut off exploration of the Ash Worlds, turning them into a weapons testing ground because there wasn't enough radiation there already, making further discoveries difficult. Haran's protege, Henrietta Antilles, named that way because Star Wars has about 5 different families, scoured Tionese archives elsewhere, and in the process discovered the Great Dwinarbulan Mausoleum, complete with archives and a map confirming the location of Astigone and Hiranom as being within the Ash Worlds, finally proving Haran's hypothesis correct. While the Hutts' campaign against the Tionese had ended at their borders following the conflicts with Xim, that only told part of the story. The Kyrium Reaches and Thanium worlds remained in Tionese possession for centuries after the war, subject only to the occasional Hutt raiding as a treat for their princes. In the year 24,500 or so, that relatively stable status quo fell apart. The Tionese and Hutts had made contact with human explorers from the core. The Hutts observed these new humans and Tionese fighting, and came to the only logical conclusion when seeing that. Whoever lost would pledge themselves to the winner, and then they'd be used to fight against the Hutts once again, leading to another war as devastating as the one with Xim. The Hutts moved quickly and brutally. They annihilated every living being within the Kyrium Reaches, along with hyperspace beacons installed by Xim. The beacons and colonies along the Warrior's Trace were left intact for use by the Hutts for navigation and as hostages respectively, in the event that the Tionese tried to oppose the Hutts again. This explained why Tionese assets and culture could be found outside of direct Tionese space, even though the Kyrium Reaches, which were farther from the Hutts, had been entirely destroyed. Between the work of the Hutts and the Republic, almost all of Xim's conquests had been reversed, and 600 years following the destruction of the Kyrium Reaches, the Thanium worlds had been lost as well. The Tionese were down basically to the territory that they'd had when Xim's father Xur had been leading them. Tion joined the Republic and ceased to be an independent galactic power. They had tried to rival the Hutts, and as a result, the galaxy forgot about an entire sector for 25 millennia. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown of the Kyrium Reaches. I'd like to do a video more directly focusing on each of the war, the early Hutts, and the history of the Tionese in the future. It is a bit unbelievable that no one else had any records of this stuff outside the Kyrium Reaches, but I do really enjoy how it's all framed and described in universe, so this was a lot of fun to make. One of the first videos I made on this channel actually explored some of these as well, so there's some nostalgia there for me too. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see covered on the channel though, and I hope to see you next time.